The greatest betrayals are never discovered by chance. They are uncovered by the questions we are too afraid to ask. Ethan Brooks had built a life that most people admired from a distance. His name carried influence. His decisions shaped industries, and his calm presence filled every room with quiet authority. Yet beneath the tailored black suit, beneath the disciplined expression, and beneath the dark tattoo that disappeared beneath the collar of his white dress shirt, lived a fear that success had never managed to silence. For years he wondered whether the woman he loved would still choose him if everything surrounding his life suddenly disappeared. He had never asked Naomi that question because part of him feared hearing the answer. Instead, he buried the doubt until it quietly became a permanent companion. On a cool autumn afternoon overlooking downtown Chicago, the hidden fear led him to the top floor of one of the city's most exclusive hotels. The executive conference suite overlooked miles of glass towers glowing beneath the golden light of late afternoon. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the room, while polished walnut floors reflected the warm sunlight. A long conference table stood at the center, decorated only with crystal water glasses, fresh white orchids, and a premium leather briefcase resting neatly in front of an empty chair. Connected to the suite was a private observation room separated by specialized privacy glass. From there, Ethan could see everything inside while remaining completely invisible. He stood alone with his hands folded quietly in front of him, telling himself that today would finally free him from years of uncertainty, no matter what he heard. Several moments later, the conference room door opened. Naomi Carter stepped inside, wearing an elegant navy blue dress, simple jewelry, and the same peaceful smile that had first captured Ethan's attention years earlier. She thanked the hotel attendant before taking her seat with graceful confidence, completely unaware that her husband stood only a few feet away behind the concealed glass. She looked around with quiet curiosity, wondering why Victoria Hayes had insisted on such an unusual meeting. The silence lasted only seconds before the door opened again. Victoria entered carrying the leather briefcase with effortless confidence. She greeted Naomi politely before placing the case upon the polished table and carefully releasing the silver clasps. Inside rested perfectly organized investment portfolios, trust agreements, property transfers, and financial documents representing a fortune capable of changing almost any life. Every page had been prepared with remarkable precision. Victoria slowly turned the briefcase toward Naomi before speaking with calm certainty. Everything inside can become yours today. Naomi lowered her eyes toward the documents but made no effort to touch them. Her expression remained composed, almost thoughtful. Behind the observation glass, Ethan felt his heartbeat growing heavier with every passing second. Victoria leaned forward slightly and continued. There is only one condition. Walk away from your marriage quietly. No arguments, no public attention. Simply begin a new life, and every opportunity on this table belongs to you. The room fell into complete silence. Beyond the windows, Chicago continued moving beneath the fading afternoon sun. Unaware that inside one quiet conference, Suite 3 Lives had reached a moment that would forever redefine trust, loyalty, and the true value of love. Naomi did not reach for the briefcase. She simply looked at the neatly arranged documents before lifting her eyes toward Victoria with calm curiosity instead of surprise. The quiet confidence on her face created an unexpected pause. Victoria had prepared herself for disbelief, hesitation, or excitement. She had not prepared for complete composure. "You are not asking what the number is," Victoria observed gently. Naomi smiled politely. "Because I do not believe the number is the important part of this conversation." Behind the observation glass, Ethan remained motionless. He had imagined this meeting countless times during restless nights, yet nothing was unfolding the way he expected. Victoria slowly removed the first folder from the briefcase and placed it in front of Naomi. "This property overlooks Lake Michigan," she explained. "It is fully paid for. The deed would belong to you." A second folder followed. "This investment portfolio has been professionally managed for years." Then another. This trust alone guarantees financial independence for the rest of your life. Every document represented comfort, security, and opportunities most people would never receive. Naomi carefully listened without interrupting. She never reached for a single page. She simply allowed Victoria to finish speaking. Outside the towering windows, the golden afternoon light slowly drifted across the polished walnut table, creating long reflections that quietly stretched between the two women. Victoria folded her hands together before asking the question she believed would change everything. "Do you know why I requested this meeting?" Naomi answered honestly. "I assumed you wanted to discuss Ethan." Victoria nodded. "I did. Years ago, before your marriage, Ethan and I imagined a future together. Life moved us in different directions, and eventually we accepted different paths. I do not regret the past, but I've always wondered whether he truly found the happiness he was searching for." Behind a privacy glass, Ethan lowered his eyes. Hearing Victoria speak without bitterness surprised him. Time had softened many things he once believed could never change. Victoria continued quietly. "When I learned about your marriage, I became curious. People often say love is stronger than money. I wanted to know whether that belief survives when someone is offered enough comfort to erase every financial worry forever." Naomi listened carefully. Her expression remained thoughtful rather than defensive. "So, this meeting is not really about me," she said softly. "It is about a question you have carried for a long time." Victoria smiled fondly. "Perhaps that is true." Silence settled over the room once again. Ethan felt the weight of every passing second. Years earlier, his relationship with Victoria had slowly faded beneath conflicting ambitions, endless travel, and different visions of the future. When he later met Naomi at a neighborhood literacy program, he never expected someone so gentle to become the center of his life. Yet even after years of marriage, one hidden fear remained. He worried that everything Naomi admired about him might disappear if his success ever vanished. That fear had quietly convinced him to allow this impossible meeting. Victoria rested one hand lightly upon the leather briefcase before speaking again. "I'm not asking you to answer immediately," she said. "Take your time. Read every page. Imagine every possibility. Sometimes the hardest decisions deserve complete honesty." Naomi looked down at the untouched documents before slowly returning her gaze to Victoria. Her eyes carried neither temptation nor judgment, only a quiet certainty that made the room feel even more still than before. Victoria remained silent for several thoughtful seconds before opening another section of the leather briefcase. Instead of another property agreement or investment summary, she removed a collection of carefully prepared architectural drawings, charitable foundation proposals, educational initiatives, and community development plans. One by one, she arranged them across the polished walnut table until the entire surface displayed a vision far larger than personal wealth. "Perhaps I approached this conversation the wrong way," she said quietly. "Forget the money for yourself. Imagine what this could accomplish for thousands of other people." Naomi lowered her eyes toward the drawings. Beautiful reading centers filled with children, scholarship programs for struggling families, neighborhood libraries, and literacy projects stretched across every page. It was impossible to deny the hope contained inside those carefully designed plans. Behind the observation glass, Ethan felt another wave of uncertainty. He had never worried that Naomi desired luxury for herself. If anything could challenge her heart, it would be the opportunity to help people on a much greater scale than either of them could ever accomplish alone. Victoria noticed Naomi studying every detail. "You have spent years volunteering," she continued. "You understand exactly how many communities need resources like these. Accept this offer, and these plans become reality immediately. Entire neighborhoods could change because of one decision." The room became completely still except for the distant hum of traffic drifting upward from the streets below. Golden afternoon light slowly faded into the soft colors of early evening, reflecting gently across the conference table. Naomi carefully closed the final folder before sliding it back toward Victoria with both hands. "These are beautiful ideas," she said sincerely. "I hope they are built one day." Victoria leaned forward with quiet confidence. "They can be. All you have to do is choose a different future." Naomi smiled gently, but there was sadness rather than hesitation in her expression. "You keep describing the future as though it begins with comfort," she answered. "Mine began with trust." Behind the privacy glass, Ethan found himself remembering a winter morning several years earlier. After volunteering together in a neighborhood literacy program, he and Naomi had stopped at a small coffee shop before sunrise. An elderly man accidentally dropped several grocery bags across the icy sidewalk. Ethan quietly helped gather every item before carrying the bags to the man's apartment building. He never mentioned the moment again because, to him, kindness did not require recognition. Naomi remembered every detail. She looked back toward Victoria with peaceful certainty. "The world knows the successful businessman," she said softly. "I know the husband who leaves encouraging notes beside my coffee before I leave for volunteer work. I know the man who quietly changes his schedule so he never misses a children's reading event after making a promise to attend. I know the person who believes generosity matters most when no one notices it." Victoria listened without interrupting. None of those memories involved wealth, luxury, or influence. They were ordinary moments, almost invisible to everyone else. Yet together they revealed a life built upon quiet consistency instead of impressive achievements. Naomi rested one hand gently upon the closed folder before returning it to the center of the table. "These projects deserve to exist," she said calmly. "But if creating them required abandoning the person who quietly helped shape every dream inside my heart, then every child walking into those buildings would remind me that I reached something beautiful by breaking the promise that mattered most." I could never call that success. Behind the observation glass, Ethan slowly closed his eyes as another piece of the fear he had carried for years quietly disappeared into the silence between them. Victoria remained quietly seated, her confidence softened by every memory Naomi had shared. The executive conference suite no longer felt like a place for negotiation. It had become a place where assumptions quietly dissolved beneath simple truths. Evening settled over the Chicago skyline as the last rays of sunlight reflected across the floor-to-ceiling windows, filling the polished walnut table with warm amber light. After several thoughtful moments, Victoria reached into the leather briefcase once more and carefully removed a sealed envelope unlike the others. She placed it gently in front of Naomi before speaking in an even voice. "This is the final proposal," she said. "Inside is everything required to establish a permanent educational foundation. Reading centers, teacher grants, scholarships, neighborhood libraries, and literacy programs could begin within months. Every document has already been prepared. You would have the resources to accomplish everything you have ever wanted for the communities you care about." Naomi looked down at the envelope without opening it immediately. She rested her fingertips lightly against the edge before lifting her eyes again. "You remember the volunteer work?" she said quietly. "Victoria Nadif. I spent time learning what matters to you. I realized that offering comfort would never be enough. Offering purpose might be." Behind the observation glass, Ethan remained completely still. His heartbeat felt heavier than at any other moment that afternoon. He knew Naomi had never dreamed about luxury. She had dreamed about children discovering books, families finding opportunity, and neighborhoods growing stronger through education. If any proposal could truly challenge her heart, this would be the one. Naomi slowly opened the envelope and carefully examined every page. Architectural plans, financial projections, scholarship outlines, and community partnerships filled the documents with remarkable detail. She read every line patiently, refusing to rush through something capable of changing so many lives. The room became perfectly silent except for the soft sound of paper turning beneath her hands. Several long minutes passed before Naomi gently closed the envelope and returned it to the center of the table. "This foundation deserves to exist," she said sincerely. Every child deserves the chance to believe their future can become larger than their circumstances. Victoria smiled hopefully. Then accept it. Build everything you have imagined. Naomi slowly shook her head. A beautiful destination cannot justify beginning the journey by abandoning the person who helped me believe those dreams were possible in the first place. Victoria lowered her eyes thoughtfully, even if refusing delays the good these programs could accomplish. Naomi answered without hesitation. Integrity teaches before any classroom ever can. If I built a foundation after breaking the promise that defines my own life, every student walking through those doors would remind me that I reached something meaningful by sacrificing something even more valuable. I would rather wait and build slowly beside an honest heart than achieve every goal by leaving it behind. Behind the privacy glass, Ethan felt an unexpected calm, replacing years of hidden fear. For so long, he believed financial security protected love. Listening to Naomi, he finally understood that trust had always been protecting both of them. The fading sunlight disappeared beyond the skyline, leaving only the gentle glow of the city lights. And inside the quiet conference room, no fortune seemed larger than the unwavering loyalty resting silently between two people who continued choosing one another even when no one else was watching. Victoria drew a slow breath before asking the one question she had quietly carried throughout the entire meeting. Her voice no longer sounded confident or persuasive. Instead, it reflected genuine curiosity. May I ask you something that has nothing to do with money? Naomi nodded gently. Of course. Victoria rested both hands upon the closed leather briefcase before continuing. When you look at Ethan, what do you actually see? The world sees a successful businessman. I see someone I once believed I understood. You describe someone completely different. Naomi smiled softly as she glanced toward the evening skyline, glowing beyond the glass walls. Because the world meets him after his work begins, she answered. I meet him before the day starts. Behind the observation glass, Ethan remained perfectly still. Every word reached him with unexpected clarity. Naomi continued quietly. Every Saturday morning, he wakes before sunrise because he knows I volunteer at the Literacy Center. He prepares coffee before I even enter the kitchen. If rain is expected, he quietly leaves an umbrella beside the front door without saying anything. When winter arrives, he reminds me to wear a heavier coat because he knows I always forget. Victoria listened without interrupting. None of those moments sounded extraordinary. Yet together, they revealed a man completely different from the one most people admired from a distance. Naomi smiled as another memory returned. One afternoon after we finished reading with the children, we stopped at a neighborhood bookstore. The owner mentioned several boxes of children's books had never sold and would probably remain in storage. Ethan quietly purchased every box and asked that they be delivered anonymously to local classrooms. He never told anyone because he believed kindness becomes more meaningful when it expects nothing in return. Ethan slowly lowered his eyes. Until that moment, he had nearly forgotten the entire afternoon. To him, it had been an ordinary decision. Naomi remembered every detail. Victoria looked thoughtful before asking another question. He never behaved that way when we were together. What changed? Naomi answered without hesitation. People continue growing when someone believes in who they are becoming instead of only remembering who they once were. Marriage is not about finding perfection. It is about encouraging each other to become better with every ordinary day. Silence settled gently across the conference room. The city lights outside continued multiplying as evening embraced the skyline. Victoria looked down at the unopened folders spread across the polished table before lifting her eyes once more. You have not mentioned his businesses a single time, she observed. Naomi smiled warmly. Because they're not the reason I stayed. Success creates comfort. Character creates peace. Every ordinary morning, Ethan gives me another reason to trust him. And trust quietly becomes the greatest gift two people can ever build together. Behind the observation glass, Ethan rested one hand against the cool surface and closed his eyes for a brief moment. For years, he believed his greatest responsibility had been providing financial security. Standing there in complete silence, he finally understood that Naomi had built their marriage upon something no balance sheet could ever measure. She remembered quiet promises, unseen acts of generosity, everyday faithfulness, and countless ordinary moments that no audience would ever celebrate. Those invisible memories had quietly become the strongest foundation beneath everything they had created together, and Ethan realized that genuine love had never been growing inside extraordinary achievements. It had been growing patiently inside the ordinary moments that only two hearts would ever remember. Victoria remained silent for several moments before asking the question she had quietly protected until every other argument had disappeared. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, carrying none of the confidence that had filled the room at the beginning of the meeting. "If everything changed tomorrow," she said softly, "if Ethan lost every company, every investment, every property, every symbol of success, what would you do?" The conference suite became completely silent. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the final traces of daylight disappeared beyond the Chicago skyline, while thousands of city lights slowly awakened below. Behind the privacy glass, Ethan felt his chest tighten. This was the question he had secretly been asking himself for years. It had never been about money alone. It had always been about whether someone would still choose him after every visible reason to stay had vanished. Naomi lowered her eyes for only a brief moment before looking back toward Victoria with complete peace. "Tomorrow morning," she answered quietly, "I would wake up beside the same man I chose yesterday." Victoria listened carefully without speaking. Naomi continued with the same gentle certainty. "Perhaps we would move into a smaller home. Perhaps we would both find different work. Perhaps life would become much harder than either of us expected. None of those possibilities frighten me because they do not change the person I married." Ethan slowly closed his eyes. Every sentence seemed to lift another layer of fear he had carried through years of success. Naomi folded her hands together on the polished table before continuing. "When people lose money, they can earn it again. When people lose careers, they can build new ones. But if two people lose trust because one of them walked away when life became difficult, rebuilding that is far more painful." Victoria asked quietly, "You truly believe you would never regret staying?" Naomi smiled with quiet warmth. "Regret comes from abandoning what truly matters. If I still have the man who treats me with kindness, honesty, patience, and respect, then I have not lost the greatest blessing in my life." The silence that followed felt almost sacred. Ethan remembered evenings spent cooking simple meals together after long days, quiet walks through neighborhood parks, and weekends surrounded by children at the literacy center. None of those memories depended upon wealth. They existed because ordinary moments had quietly become extraordinary through shared faithfulness. Naomi gently rested one hand upon the unopened envelope before sliding it back toward Victoria. "Money creates options," she said softly. "Character creates a home. Wealth can provide comfort, but trust allows people to sleep peacefully beside one another every night. If I accepted everything inside this briefcase by leaving the person who has never stopped believing in me, every beautiful thing I built afterward would remind me of the promise I chose to break. I could never call that a better future." Behind the observation glass, Ethan remained perfectly still as an unfamiliar sense of peace settled over him. For the first time in many years, he understood that the answer he had been searching for had never belonged inside financial statements, luxury buildings, or carefully planned tests. It had been quietly waiting inside the unwavering heart of the woman who would still reach for his hand, even if tomorrow required both of them to begin their lives all over again. For several long seconds, no one moved. The quiet inside the executive conference suite seemed to stretch endlessly, as though every word Naomi had spoken had settled gently into the room and refused to leave. Behind the privacy glass, Ethan finally understood there was nothing left to test. The answer he had spent years searching for had already been spoken with complete honesty. He reached toward the polished brass handle connecting the observation room to the conference suite. The soft click of the opening door echoed through the silence. Naomi immediately turned toward the sound, surprise filling her eyes as Ethan stepped into the room. Victoria slowly rose from her chair, realizing that the conversation she believed had been private had been witnessed from beginning to end. Ethan walked forward with measured steps. His tailored black suit remained perfectly pressed, the edge of the dark tattoo visible above the collar of his white dress shirt against his fair skin, yet the confidence people usually associated with him had quietly disappeared. In its place stood humility. No one spoke. Evening lights reflected across the glass walls while the Chicago skyline shimmered beyond the windows. Victoria was the first to break the silence. "How long have you been listening?" she asked quietly. Ethan answered without hesitation. "Long enough to hear every answer I should have trusted enough to ask instead of trying to discover in secret." Victoria lowered her eyes with thoughtful regret. "I believed I understood love," she admitted. "Today I realized I only understood negotiation." Ethan offered a respectful nod. "I made a similar mistake. I believed fear could be solved by certainty instead of honesty." Naomi looked at Ethan carefully, understanding slowly appearing across her face. "You knew this meeting was happening," she said softly. Ethan met her eyes without searching for excuses. "Yes," he answered. "I allowed my own insecurity to become stronger than the trust you had already earned. Instead of telling you about my fear, I hid behind silence. I am deeply sorry." Naomi remained quiet for several moments. There was disappointment in her expression, but there was also compassion. "You could have simply asked me," she replied gently. Ethan smiled with quiet sadness. "I know. I wish I had believed I deserved the answer." Naomi slowly walked toward him until only a few feet separated them. Without anger or hesitation, she reached for his hand. Ethan accepted it with both of his own, holding it carefully as though protecting something precious that had nearly been lost. Victoria watched this simple gesture with growing understanding. She had expected arguments, resentment, or triumph. Instead, she witnessed honesty replacing pride. Ethan turned toward Victoria with sincere gratitude. "Thank you," he said calmly. She looked genuinely surprised. "After everything that happened?" Ethan nodded. "Because today did not reveal weakness in my wife. It revealed weakness inside me. That truth gives me the opportunity to become a better husband than I was yesterday." Victoria smiled quietly, not with satisfaction, but with respect. The leather briefcase remained untouched in the center of the polished table, no longer representing temptation or success. It had become nothing more than an ordinary object resting beside something infinitely more valuable. As the lights of Chicago continued glowing beyond the windows, Ethan realized that lasting love is never protected by wealth, influence, or carefully designed tests. It survives because two people choose honesty before fear, trust before doubt, and one another before everything else. The conference suite remained quiet as the last conversation slowly settled into understanding. No one seemed interested in returning to the documents spread across the polished walnut table. The briefcase that had entered the room as a symbol of temptation now felt strangely insignificant beside the honesty that had unfolded over the past hour. Victoria looked toward Ethan and Naomi before gently closing every folder and placing them back inside the leather case. "I've spent years believing success was measured by what people gained," she said softly. "Today I realized it is also measured by what people refuse to give away." Naomi offered a warm smile, free from judgment or triumph. "Every person has the opportunity to choose a different ending," she replied. Ethan slowly stepped closer to the conference table and rested one hand on the closed briefcase. He looked thoughtfully at the carefully prepared foundation plans before speaking. "The purpose behind these documents was never wrong," he said. "Only the reason they were brought into this room was." Victoria listened quietly as Ethan continued. "Those literacy centers, scholarships, neighborhood libraries, and educational programs deserve to exist. Children should never lose opportunities because 3 adults needed to learn something about trust. Naomi looked toward him with gentle surprise before her expression softened into quiet agreement. Then let the dream remain, she said. Just not the condition attached to it. Ethan nodded. Over the coming weeks, everything necessary will be transferred into an independent educational foundation. The legal process will be completed properly, and every project outlined here will move forward exactly as intended. Victoria looked genuinely moved. Without your names attached? She asked. Ethan smiled faintly. Especially without our names attached. Recognition fades. Opportunity lasts much longer. Naomi glanced once more at the architectural drawings spread across the table before carefully placing them back inside the briefcase. The children who walk into those buildings should feel grateful for the books waiting on the shelves, not curious about the people who paid for them. The room settled into another thoughtful silence. Beyond the glass walls, the lights of Chicago shimmered beneath the evening sky while traffic flowed steadily through the streets below. Life outside continued exactly as it had before, completely unaware that 3 people inside one conference room had quietly changed the direction of countless future lives. Victoria slowly extended her hand toward Naomi. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "Not because you agreed with me, but because you reminded me that integrity is worth more than certainty." Naomi accepted the handshake warmly. "We all leave today understanding something we did not understand this morning." Ethan watched both women with quiet gratitude. He realized forgiveness rarely arrived through dramatic speeches or extraordinary gestures. Sometimes it appeared through calm conversations, honest admissions, and a willingness to leave pride behind. Together, they walked toward the elevator without anyone carrying the briefcase as a prize. It had become nothing more than a container for a future that would soon belong to children, teachers, and communities instead of any individual. As the elevator doors slowly closed, Ethan glanced toward Naomi and smiled with complete peace. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt the need to measure love against fear. He finally understood that trust becomes strongest when it is freely given, never secretly tested, and quietly protected through ordinary choices made every single day. Several weeks later, the first cool breeze of autumn drifted through the streets of Chicago as a newly completed community literacy center quietly welcomed its first visitors. Morning sunlight poured through tall windows, filling every reading room with warmth while shelves lined with brand-new books stretched from one end of the building to the other. Comfortable wooden tables stood ready for eager students. Colorful reading corners invited young imaginations to wander, and volunteers greeted families with genuine smiles that expected nothing in return. There were no banners celebrating wealthy donors, no marble plaques engraved with famous names, and no cameras waiting to capture carefully staged moments. The people who made the center possible had chosen to remain completely anonymous. Ethan Brooks and Naomi Carter entered, together before the building became busy. They walked slowly through each room without drawing attention to themselves, quietly watching children discover books many of them had never imagined owning. One little boy carefully opened his first chapter book while his younger sister proudly carried a stack of colorful picture books almost too large for her small arms. Nearby, a teacher knelt beside a reading circle, encouraging every child to read one page aloud with confidence. Laughter, curiosity, and hope gently filled every corner of the building. Ethan paused beside one of the large windows overlooking the neighborhood and smiled more peacefully than he had in years. Success had once meant expanding companies, completing difficult negotiations, and reaching ambitious goals that seemed impossible only months earlier. Standing inside the literacy center, he finally understood that none of those achievements had ever brought him the quiet fulfillment he now felt while watching children discover opportunities hidden inside ordinary pages. Naomi stood beside him with the same calm smile that had first drawn him toward her years before. "This has always been the dream," she whispered softly. Ethan nodded with quiet gratitude. For a long time, I believed my greatest responsibility was protecting our future with success, he replied. You taught me that the strongest future is built by protecting trust instead. Naomi reached for his hand, and together they continued walking through the center, thanking volunteers, greeting teachers, and encouraging every child they met without revealing their connection to the anonymous foundation that had made the building possible. Before leaving, one volunteer thanked them simply for giving their time on weekends. Ethan smiled warmly and answered that helping children discover a love for reading was reward enough. As they stepped outside, colorful autumn leaves drifted gently across the sidewalk while the city continued moving through another ordinary afternoon. Ethan looked toward Naomi with complete honesty and peaceful certainty. I spent years believing wealth gave people reasons to stay, he said quietly. Now I understand that kindness, trust, patience, and everyday faithfulness were the reasons you never left. Naomi smiled with calm confidence. Love is never measured by what survives the easiest days, she replied. It is revealed by what remains after fear finally disappears. Ethan looked back through the windows where children continued reading together beneath the warm morning light, and he realized the greatest fortune he would ever possess had never rested inside a leather briefcase, an investment portfolio, or a successful business. It had always been waiting inside the unwavering heart of the woman who chose him every ordinary day without asking for anything except honesty. And in that quiet moment, the world quietly remembered what true dignity, lasting trust, and genuine love really look like.